4 women across 42 generations of men. That's all the first page of the New Testament allows into Christ's lineage. And around the year 398 in Bethlehem, Jerome of Stridon makes his ruling. These women are sinners. What follows is not a sermon, it's a case file. The file of the first woman on that list, a Bronze Age widow broken by her own family, cast out, then sentenced to the flames. You're about to see how a custom meant to protect widows was used to crush one of them. You're about to hear the only line in all of Genesis in which a patriarch bows to a woman's justice. And you're about to understand why her name, carefully avoided for centuries from the pulpit, is still spoken aloud every year in churches across the world, even though almost no one knows who she was. If you're watching this, you already know that archives have their silences. This one has lasted 16 centuries. The chapter exists. It has a number, a place in the canon, and translations in every language. People simply stopped reading it aloud in public. Tonight, the file is opened. The hills of Adullam in the land of Canaan, the Middle Bronze Age, long before the kings, long before the temple, before there was even a word for Israel. The smell of lanolin and sun-baked dust, the bleating of flocks among the stone terraces, and a man coming down from the high country to settle in the lowlands. His name is Judah, the 4th son of Jacob. He has just left his brothers after an incident we'll come back to, because what he did up there in the hills will come back for him at the exact moment he thinks he is judging someone else. Hold on to that detail. It will matter later. In Adullam, Judah becomes close to a local man named Hira. He marries the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. 3 sons are born, Onan, and Shelah. The text makes a point of saying that the third is born in a village called Kezib. In Hebrew, the root of that name means to lie, to deceive. The scribes left that signpost standing in the middle of the story. You have entered the land of falsehood. Then comes the sentence that sets everything in motion. Genesis chapter 38, verse 6. Judah found a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. 10 words in our translations. No father named, no clan, no age, no face. Tamar enters the Bible the way women of that time so often do, as an object exchanged between 2 men. Her name means date palm, the tree that stays standing in the desert and bears fruit where nothing else survives. The text does not say whether she was Canaanite. It does not say whether she consented. No one cared. What happens next is contained in a single verse, and that verse cuts like a blade. Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. The text does not spell out what evil he committed. But notice how the mechanism works. The husband is guilty, the husband dies, and the wife is the one who will pay. Tamar has still done nothing, said nothing, chosen nothing. She is a widow in a chujoi house, without a child. And in that world, a widow without a son was not so much a mourner as a person in danger. There was, however, a safety net, an ancient custom later written into Israel's law in Deuteronomy chapter 25, levirate marriage. When a man dies without a son, his brother must marry the widow, and the first child from that union carries the dead man's name. The family line continues. The widow regains status, a place, a future. There is nothing romantic about it. This is Bronze Age social protection, the only kind available to a woman whose husband is in the ground. The custom even made room for refusal. If the brother refused to do his duty, the widow could drag him before the elders at the city gate, take off his sandal, and and spit in his face, publicly. The law gave a humiliated woman the right to humiliate in return. Keep that in mind. The right existed. The procedure existed. Everything that follows happens because the men involved decided that none of it would apply to Tamar. So Judah orders his second son, Onan, to do his duty as a brother-in-law. And this is where the case becomes precise, clinical, unbearable. Genesis chapter 38, verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went in to his brother's wife, he spilled it on the ground, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. Read the grammar again. The Hebrew verb is not in the completed past, but in an iterative form, the Hebrew of repetition, of habit. Whenever he went in, every time he went in. This did not happen on one night. It kept happening. Let's break down what the verse describes, without the modesty of softened translations. Onan takes his sister-in-law's body. As her husband, that is his legal right, and she has no way to refuse, no recourse, no exit. Then, at the last moment, he destroys on the ground what would have made her a mother, a person with legal standing, a woman restored. He keeps for himself the use of this woman. He denies her everything this union was supposed to give back to her, and then he does it again. The calculation is sordid and perfectly rational. As long as Tamar has no son, her dead husband's inheritance passes to Onan. Every night he takes her and leaves her empty. He profits. Tamar's body has become an instrument for siphoning off an inheritance. Contemporary readers of the text put into this verse the words the centuries refused to write. Repeated sexual violence. Inside a marriage, the victim had no way to leave. The use of a woman against the very promise that was supposed to justify that union. And yet, in the text, the shame falls on one thing alone, the act itself, not on her. Remember that shift. This entire investigation is contained in it. The next verse falls like a guillotine. What he did was displeasing to the Lord, so he put him to death as well. 2 brothers, 2 deaths. The text is explicit. In this story, heaven killed only men and only the guilty. No divine word condemns Tamar, not a line, not a word, nowhere. Keep that fact in mind. You'll see what tradition did with it. But a third man is watching these 2 graves. The father, Judah. And from the death of his sons, Judah draws a remarkable conclusion. Not that his sons were wicked, though the text has now established that twice over. No. Judah concludes that the woman is bad luck. There it is, the oldest mechanism in the case file. 2 guilty men, 1 accused woman. The text states the brother's guilt in so many words. Judah looks at the facts, and the facts trouble him, so he points to the survivor. He has 1 son left, Shelah, the last one. The custom is clear, the obligation is clear. And Judah speaks. Genesis chapter 38, verse 11. Remain a widow in your father's house until my son, Shelah, is grown. It sounds like a patriarch's sentence, measured, almost kindly. Then the biblical narrator adds an aside you don't notice on a first reading, and yet it is one of the most extraordinary lines in Genesis. For he said this because he feared that Shelah would die like his brothers. The sacred text has just shown you a lie being made in real time. The narrator opens Judah's skull and lets you read inside. He has no intention of giving Shelah to her. The promise is a door painted on a wall. And that painted door has a legal name. Tamar is sent away, neither wife, nor free, nor divorced. If Judah had divorced her, she would have been free. She could have remarried, built a life somewhere else. But Judah does not divorce her. He keeps her bound to his household with an empty promise and sends her out of his sight. She goes back to her father's house the way a package is returned. She puts on widow's clothes, the clothing that tells the whole village she is untouchable, set apart, suspended. A woman stored away in a cupboard, sent away from her husband's house, sent away from the tribe that would become Israel, sent away from her own story. The title of this investigation says it all: driven out from the people of God. And that is exactly what it means. No formal excommunication, no court of law, just a father's order, a packed bag, and the beginning of silence. Think about what her life actually becomes in concrete terms. A young woman, widowed twice, living in the house of a father the text does not even bother to name. She cannot remarry. By law, she belongs to Shelah. She cannot claim Shelah. Only Judah can give him to her. She cannot inherit from either her first husband or her second. She mourns men who mistreated her, and that mourning has become her entire identity. Every morning, the dark cloth of widowhood. Every evening, the same cloth. The rough fabric against her skin, year after year, it is the only touch the world still allows her. Her father's house is not a refuge. It is storage. One more mouth to feed, one that will bring no new dowry, no alliance, no grandchildren. The whole village knows the bond that ties her to Shelah. At the well in the morning, conversations stop when she approaches and start up again behind her back in hushed tones. The cool water on her hands and the stairs settling on the back of her neck like insects. The men in this story have graves and verdicts. Judged. Onan, judged. She, the only innocent person in the chapter, has no trial, no sentence, no release date. The text records no protest from her, not because she agrees, but who could she appeal to? The only judge with authority is the man who shut her away. The seasons turn. Shearing time, sowing time, the barley harvest, shearing time again. Every passing year makes Judah's lie both more obvious and more comfortable. Shelah is growing up before everyone's eyes, and no one says a word. The silent complicity of decent people is the quiet fuel behind every enduring injustice. And time passes. The text says it with calm cruelty. The days multiplied. Shelah grew up. Tamar waited. In a village where everyone knows, and where her status does not even have a name, neither married, nor free, nor dead. Later, Jewish tradition would forge a word for this: agunah, the chained woman. Chapter 38 shows us the prototype, 2,000 years before the vocabulary existed. But then one day, tucked away in a verse, the text lets slip the news Tamar had been waiting for, and another piece of news she hadn't. Shelah is grown up, and she has not been given to him as a wife. Judah's promise has just expired in public. Anyone in the land can do the math she does. They are never going to give her to him. She will die in widow's clothes in her father's house with no child, no land, no name carried on. That is the real sentence, never spoken, never written, yet perfectly enforceable. Then Judah's wife dies, the daughter of Shua, the Canaanite woman. Judah mourns, finds comfort, and the patriarch's life moves on. Because for patriarchs, life always moves on. Then word spreads through the land. Judah is going up to Timnah for the shearing of his sheep. Sheep shearing. Think of the countryside in the old days, at the end of harvest. It was exactly like that. A week of brutal labor and wild celebration. Wool piling up, wine flowing, landowners paying the crews, money changing hands, and ordinary morality taking leave. Everyone knows what goes on by the roadside during shearing time. Tamar knows it too. Take stock of her options if you want to understand what comes next. Run away? A woman alone, with no money and no escort, does not cross Bronze Age valleys. She ends up enslaved or dead at the first mountain pass. Remarry in secret? Any man who took her would be stealing property from Judah's household. The clan would come to collect, and the sentence would fall anyway. Appeal to the elders? The sandal procedure is meant for a reluctant brother hauled before the court, but Judah is the court. Wait longer? The text has just stamped an expiration date on waiting. Shelah is grown, and she is not being given to him. Every door is bricked shut except one, the one no sensible woman would dare even look at, because it leads to the patriarch himself. She has only one lever left in the world, the man who arranged her ruin. So she uses it. And then comes the most commented on, most censored, and most misunderstood scene in the entire book of Genesis. Genesis, chapter 38, verse 14. Then she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, on the road to Timnah. Let's pause over every gesture, because each one is a procedural act. She takes off her widow's clothes. She strips away the uniform Judah imposed on her, the identity of a woman left in suspension. She covers herself with a veil, not to seduce, but to erase her face. What follows depends on Judah not recognizing her. She sits at the entrance to Enaim, a crossroads whose Hebrew name means the opening of the eyes. Judah's eyes, of course, will not be opened. The irony is stitched into the very geography of the story. Understand clearly what she is doing, because centuries of commentary have distorted it. Tamar is not looking for a customer. She is not looking for pleasure. She is not even looking for a husband. She is seeking what custom owes her, offspring from the house of Judah. The lawful path was stolen from her, levirate marriage through Shelah. Only one possible path remains, and it leads through the only man in that house she can still reach, the patriarch himself, a widower, on his way to the sheep shearing festival. It is a trap set by a woman who knows perfectly well the man she is trapping. She knows he will not ask her name. She knows he will not look beneath the veil. She is counting on Judah's blindness. And Judah's blindness is the one bet in this whole story she is certain to win. Judah sees her. The text is devastatingly terse. He took her for a prostitute because she had covered her face. He approaches her. He bargains. He offers a young goat from his flock, a young goat already. In this family, that animal carries a memory. Tamar accepts the price, then asks the question that will overturn the history of Israel. What pledge will you give me until you send the young goat? And Judah, who has not recognized his daughter-in-law, answers like a man in a hurry. What pledge shall I give you? She has had the answer ready from the very beginning. Your seal, your cord, and the staff in your hand. You have to translate these three objects into the language of administration, or you miss the scene. The seal is the cylinder seal that powerful men wear around their necks. Hanging from its cord, they roll it across fresh clay to sign a contract, a debt, an order. The staff is the emblem of the clan chief, carved and instantly recognizable. In other words, his signature, his ID, his title deed. A Bronze Age man who hands over his seal and his staff has handed over his entire legal identity. That is what Tamar asks for, and that is what Judah gives her, without a second's hesitation, for a quick encounter by the roadside. The man who would not risk his third son to honor a sacred obligation gives up his entire identity for a passing desire. The text adds no comment.
It does not need to. She became pregnant by him. 5 words. The line of Judah, which the patriarch thought he was protecting by sacrificing Tamar, has just been saved by Tamar at that exact moment on that road, and no one knows it yet, not even her. What she does next completely dismantles the legend of the seductress. She gets up, leaves, takes off her veil, and puts her widow's clothes back on. She returns to her prison of fabric, and she waits. She does not blackmail Judah. She asks for nothing. She puts away 3 objects somewhere in her father's house, the way you'd store evidence before a trial whose date you still don't know. Judah, for his part, keeps his word in his own way. He sends the promised young goat by the hand of his friend Hira, the Adullamite. Hira walks the road to Enaim, questioning the local people. And here, the text slips in a detail that translations often flatten out. Judah had seen a prostitute, a zona. Hira, more respectable, asks where the Kedeshah is, the consecrated woman, a religious term historians still debate. Shame is already dressing itself up as vocabulary. The people of Enaim answer, unfazed. There has never been any consecrated woman here. Judah hears the report, and then says a line with such dark humor it sounds like it was written for a modern courtroom. Let her keep what she has, and let's not make ourselves the laughingstock of a village. I sent the goat, and they didn't find her. Too bad. The man would rather leave his seal, his cord, and his staff out in the world than face ridicule. His identity versus his reputation. He chooses reputation. Remember that choice. In a few verses, he will make it again, believing this time that it will cost only a woman's life. Before we open the next part of the file, one clarification. This investigation comes out with no sponsor, no institution behind it, no media backing. It exists only because people watch it. If you want the series to continue, subscribe, turn on notifications, and say in the comments which woman of the Bible deserves the next case file. Like this video if the first half held your attention. The second half goes even further. 3 months pass. Under her widow's clothes, Tamar is now carrying the only living descendants of the house of Judah. Then the village starts talking, the way all villages do. The rumor travels back up the valley, from well to well, all the way to the patriarch's tent. Genesis chapter 38, verse 24. They came and told Judah, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted as a prostitute, and now she is pregnant because of it. Now listen to the response. 2 words in Hebrew, the swiftest sentence in the whole book of Genesis. Bring her out and let her be burned. No summons, no witnesses, no question put to the accused, not even the slightest curiosity about the identity of the man who, in this village, is still walking free. A patriarch learns that a woman of his household is pregnant, and the order comes down in the middle of ordinary daily life. Fire. Notice the speed of it. To deny Shelah to Tamar,
Judah had found years of patience and endless reserves of caution. To condemn Tamar, he needs a single sentence. The legal laziness of the powerful always runs one way, slow to deliver justice, lightning fast to punish. And the stake is not a metaphor. In the whole book of Genesis, no other named person receives this sentence: to be burned. Later, Israelite law would reserve it for only one extremely rare case. In Leviticus chapter 21, the daughter of a priest who becomes a prostitute. Rabbinic tradition even drew the conclusion that Tamar must have been a priest's daughter, a daughter of Shem himself, for the sentence to make any sense. Notice what the ancient commentators are doing. Rather than admit Judah's arbitrariness, they elevate the victim's birth. But the text explains nothing. A humiliated man has power. A pregnant woman has none. Fire is the shortest path between those two facts. So they come for her at her father's house. The procession moves through the village, dust from the road under bare feet, doors cracking open, whispers trailing behind them like a train. She is 3 months pregnant. The women who used to meet her at the well watch as she is led away to be burned. No one speaks in her defense. Not her father, silent since the beginning of the story. Not an elder of the village. Not a single voice. This is the moment Tamar chooses to bring out the 3 objects she has kept for months. First, notice what she does not do. She does not scream Judah's name in the town square. She does not drag him publicly through the mud, though she has every means to do it, and she is walking toward a funeral pyre. The text says, as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. She sends him a private message with the evidence enclosed. Here are the exact words, Genesis chapter 38, verse 25. I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong. Please identify whose seal, cord, and staff these are. Please identify them. In Hebrew, haker na. 2 words. Remember them, because they are the hidden keystone of the entire book. Centuries later, a master from Champagne would linger over this verse. Rashi of Troyes, the greatest Jewish commentator of the Middle Ages, who taught among the vineyards of Champagne and slipped old French words into his commentaries. Words linguists still gather today like fossils of our own language. Quoting the Talmud, Rashi draws a breathtaking lesson from this verse. Better for a man to be thrown into a blazing furnace than to make his fellow man go pale with shame in public. And where do we learn that from? From Tamar. She walked toward the fire and left Judah the choice of exposing himself. Jewish tradition saw in that act one of the highest moral moments in the entire Hebrew Bible, while other traditions, as we'll see, chose instead to read it as a tale of loose morals. But let's come back to Hakerna. Please recognize this. If those words hit Judah with such devastating force, it's because he has heard them before, because he has spoken them before. Go back 1 chapter. Genesis, chapter 37. Judah and his brothers have just sold Joseph, their father's favorite child, sold to passing traders on whose suggestion? Judah's. Then the brothers slaughter a young goat, dip Joseph's tunic in the blood, and send it to Jacob with a message. Please recognize whether this is your son's tunic or not. Hakerna. The very same words, word for word. Judah destroyed his father with a deceptive garment, a slaughtered goat, and the words, please recognize this. Years later, a woman destroys him and rebuilds him with a deceptive garment, a promised goat, and those same words. Please recognize this. The symmetry is perfect, right down to the props. The great literary critic Robert Alter, in his 1981 study of the art of biblical narrative, showed what the Midrashim had sensed since antiquity. Chapter 38 is nothing like some stray parenthesis dropped into the story of Joseph. It is its exact mirror, the chapter where the trickster is caught in his own trap, measure for measure. The text is there. The two verses answer each other. No scribe ever dared erase the symmetry. Now imagine the scene from Judah's side. The procession is moving, the wood perhaps already gathered. Then someone brings him 3 objects and a sentence. He lowers his eyes and sees himself. The seal he presses into clay on every contract, the worn cord around his neck, the staff whose every groove he knows beneath his palm. The man who said, "Let her be burned," is holding in his own hands the proof that the fire is for him. Everything comes down to a single breath. He can deny it. Who would believe a condemned woman over a patriarch? He can say nothing. Let the procession move on. Let the fire consume the problem and the evidence with it. In the overwhelming majority of human stories, ancient and modern, that is exactly what happens. The powerful man stays silent, the woman burns, and the record disappears. And this is where Genesis breaks from the pattern. Genesis chapter 38, verse 26. Judah recognized them, and he said, "She is more righteous than I." Weigh every word, because this moment will not come again. A patriarch of Israel, the namesake ancestor of the royal tribe, publicly declares before his clan gathered for an execution that a woman, a pregnant Canaanite widow, unmarried, legally his property, already condemned by his own mouth, is more righteous than he is. Sadeka mimeni, she is righteous more than I am. Nowhere else in all of Genesis does a man say this of a woman. Nowhere else does a judge step down from his seat and place himself on the bench of the accused, halfway to the stake. And notice what the Hebrew says in its fearsome brevity. Some readers even hear 2 confessions nested inside it. She is righteous, the child is mine. Acquittal and acknowledgement of paternity in a single breath. Both readings are ancient, both have been defended, and both fully clear Tamar. Now open a few French Bibles, the ones sitting on our shelves. Several classic translations, including the most widespread one from the 19th century, render the sentence like this: "She is less guilty than I." Read that again. Less guilty. The Hebrew text says righteous. The translation invents guilt, then merely argues about degrees of it. Acquittal becomes a mitigating circumstance. That is how innocence gets shaved down, syllable by syllable, in the hushed workshop of translators. It is not a stake, it is a file. The verse closes with 5 words no one ever quotes. And he knew her no more. Judah will never touch her again. The text locks out any romantic reading. No love story, no salvaged marriage, no sentimental redemption. What happened on the road to Enaim had less to do with desire than with procedure. She got justice, not a husband. The civil case is closed. And what remains is the most unsettling part. Tamar herself says nothing more. She speaks only twice in the entire chapter. 2 lines of negotiation, precise as contract clauses, and then silence. The text gives her no cry of relief, no triumph, no tears. The great women who win in the Hebrew Bible are often silent at the moment of their victory, as if the narrator knows that any commentary would only weaken the evidence entered into the record. So, is the story over? A trapped woman trapped a trapper. The fire went out before it was even lit, and justice was done at the very edge of the stake. A fine story, already scandalous, already enough to explain why nobody reads it to children in catechism. Except nothing is over, because one piece of evidence still remains, the heaviest of them all. It isn't in Genesis. It appears nearly 2,000 years later on the very first page of another book, in a list of names the whole world has at home and never reads. This piece of evidence fits into a single line, and that line made the most powerful institution in history bend. In the last third of the first century of our era, somewhere in the Greco-Syrian world, Antioch, many historians say, a Jewish Christian scribe, whom tradition would later call Matthew, opens his gospel, the text that would inaugurate the New Testament, with the most solemn document a Jewish scribe could produce, a genealogy, the official family tree of the Messiah. 42 generations, from Abraham to Jesus, lined up like notarized records. All men, of course. So-and-so begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so. And then, in verse 3, the list goes off the rails. Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. By Tamar. Two words that had no business being there. In a Jewish genealogy, women do not count. The line runs through the fathers, and the scribe knows that better than anyone. 42 generations, and then at the third link in the chain, the author breaks his formula, opens the line of males, and carves a woman's name into it. Not Sarah, the perfect wife. Not Rebecca, not Rachel, not Leah, the official mothers of Israel. None of the matriarchs is given that privilege. The first woman named in the New Testament, the very first one, in the third verse of the first page, is the widow her husband's family exploited, cast out, and condemned to the flames. Not a footnote, not a copyist concession, not an accident, a signature. And Matthew does it again. 3 other women appear in his list, and the choice forms a pattern no ancient reader could have missed. Rahab, a prostitute from Jericho, a real one by trade, who saved Israel's spies. Ruth, a foreigner from Moab, a despised people, slipping by night into a prominent man's bed. The wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, whom King David took after having her husband killed. Matthew refuses even to write her name, so the listener stumbles over the king's crime. 4 women, 4 scandals, 4 cases respectable families would hush up. The evangelist pins them to the front of his book like photographs on an investigator's wall. Modern exegesis, and Raymond Brown, one of the greatest Catholic scholars of the infancy narratives, established this back in the 1970s, reads this motif as a preparation. 4 irregular pregnancies, scandalous in the eyes of the world, through which God still carried the promise forward. Just before a 5th, that of a fiancée from Nazareth, pregnant with a child who is not her fiancé's. Matthew builds his defense of Mary with the case file of Tamar. The woman they were leading to the stake opens the way for the mother of Christ. But let's go back to the first link in the chain, because we need to see how you get from an extinguished pyre to a throne. Back to Canaan. Tamar gives birth, and the midwife quickly realizes there are 2 babies. A tiny hand comes out first. The midwife ties a crimson thread around it, the ancient marker of birthright. That one came out first. Then the hand withdraws, and it is the other child who forces his way through, tears open a path, and is born first against every rule. The midwife, astonished, cries out, "What a breach you have made for yourself!" He is named Perez, the breach. His brother, with the red thread, follows after, Zerah. Pause on that image. the last one in chapter 38. A newborn who refuses the established order of birth, who passes where there was no passage. Tamar's son is born exactly as his mother lived, forcing a breach through a wall others had sealed shut. The text does not explain. The best records never do. They let the evidence speak for itself. Now follow the crimson thread through the books, because Israel's scribes kept the record with a notary's care. Genesis chapter 46. When Jacob's clan goes down to Egypt, the official list of the 70 founding souls of Israel includes Perez and his 2 sons. Tamar's grandsons are counted among the foundations of the people. The woman cast out of the house did not merely survive. Her descendants are stitched into the nation's birth certificate. And that is not all. Centuries pass, and the thread appears again where no one expects it, in Bethlehem, in one of the Bible's gentlest stories. At the precise moment, it becomes a contract. The Book of Ruth, final chapter. At the gate of Bethlehem, the very place where judgments are rendered, a landowner named Boaz marries Ruth, the foreign widow from Moab, through the same mechanism of family redemption that had been denied to Tamar. This time, the man does his duty, and the elders of the city, assembled like a jury, pronounce the official blessing over the couple. Listen to what they choose to say in the middle of the public square before witnesses. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. That Tamar bore children to Judah. In a solemn assembly, the leaders of Israel bless a newly married couple by wishing them a household like that of the woman once sentenced to the stake, and they name her. No veiled allusion, no awkward euphemism. Her name, plainly spoken, in a wedding blessing. In just a few generations, the woman they had dragged to the fire had become a model of fertility and righteousness, invoked at the city gates. This reversal is not some modern activist reading. It is written into the text itself. And the writer of Ruth drives the point home by closing his book with a stark genealogy, 10 names in a row. This is the line of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, and the list descends, father to son, down to the final 3 names. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. David, the shepherd who became king, the founder of the dynasty, the man whose name would carry all of Israel's messianic hope. Count it up. Perez, the child of the breach, the child conceived by the roadside at Enaim, is the direct ancestor of King David in the 10th generation. Tamar's son founded the royal house. The entire monarchy of Israel came from the womb of a woman the tribe of Judah had cast aside, and who came within a single sentence of being burned alive. Chronicles, written after the exile, when Israel was reconstructing its official records with meticulous care, could have used that sweeping cleanup to make the episode disappear. The chronicler does the opposite. Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, bore him Perez and Zerah. There it is in black and white in the state record. 4 books name her: Genesis, Ruth, Chronicles, Matthew. 2 testaments, centuries of writing, and a single woman's name tied all the way through to the royal line. The scribes had 1,000 chances to erase her. Not one of them did. Faced with this record, the masters of the Midrash, the Jewish commentators of late antiquity, wrote a line that is almost dizzying. In Genesis Rabbah, compiled around the 5th century, we read this: While the tribes were busy selling Joseph, while Jacob was consumed with mourning, while Judah was busy finding himself a wife, the Holy One, blessed be He, was busy creating the light of the Messiah. The light of the Messiah. That is what the rabbis saw in chapter 38. Not an embarrassing story to hide, but the precise moment when, behind the backs of every man in the story, the future was being made. Through a woman, those same men were in the process of destroying. While the patriarchs betray, lie, and condemn, history passes through the condemned woman. Tamar in Genesis, Tamar in Ruth, Tamar in Chronicles, Tamar in the Gospel. 4 records, 4 eras, 1 constant, and a question that should be burning in you by now. If the texts themselves preserved her name this stubbornly, then who erased her from our memory? Why do you know who Delilah is, who Jezebel is, who Salome is, but not who Tamar is? The answer has names, dates, and places. It begins in a cave in Bethlehem at the end of the 4th century, beneath the lamp of a brilliant translator. Bethlehem, around the year 398. In a cell carved out near the Grotto of the Nativity, the smell of lamp oil, the scratch of a pen on parchment. Jerome of Stridon is at work, the man who was then giving the West its Latin Bible, the Vulgate. Jerome is writing his commentary on Matthew. He comes to verse 3, stumbles over these women who disrupt his list, and he makes his ruling. The sentence has been preserved, dated, and translated in every scholarly edition. It should be noted that in the genealogy of the Savior, none of the holy women are included, only those whom Scripture blames. Only those whom Scripture blames. Read that sentence again, then set it beside verse 26 of Genesis. It speaks more accurately than I do. Scripture nowhere blames Tamar. Scripture clears her from the very mouth of her accuser and then blesses her through the elders of Bethlehem. Jerome writes the opposite just a few hills away from the place where that blessing was spoken. The father of the Latin Bible, the patron saint of translators, turns an acquittal into a prosecution. Sinners, that would now be the common category for Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Christ descended from the guilty, and these women were there to prove it. The reversal is brilliantly devastating. Her name is not crossed out. Impossible, it is in the canon. It is reclassified. The plaintiff becomes the accused. Exculpatory evidence becomes an exhibit for the prosecution. And for more than 1,000 years, monks, preachers, and textbooks would repeat Jerome's category without ever reopening the case. The 4 women of the genealogy, figures of forgiven sin. Around the same time, in Antioch and then in Constantinople, John Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed, the greatest Greek preacher of his century, addresses the same passage before his congregation. He lingers over it, uneasy, magnificent in his discomfort. Why did the evangelist bring up this story of sexual immorality? He asks his listeners, in essence. His answer is clever, to show that Christ is not ashamed of our shame. But from that point on, shame changes sides. In Genesis, the shame falls on Onan and on Judah. In the homily, it wraps itself around Tamar. Between the two, no new facts, no new records, just centuries of men in the pulpit, the only ones holding the microphone. That pattern would hold for 1,000 years and more. In the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas was still copying Jerome's judgment in his great chain of commentary on the Gospels. After him, the manuals would go on copying it, century after century. A filing error, passed down long enough, becomes tradition. And once something is tradition, no one checks it anymore. That shift had begun even before Christianity. An ancient Jewish text, the Testament of Judah, an apocryphal work written around the 2nd century before our era, has the patriarch speak in the first person, like a set of posthumous memoirs. And what does Judah tell there? That he had been drinking,
that wine blinded him on the road to Timnah, and that without the drunkenness, he would never have gone near that woman. The wine excuses the patriarch. The scheme condemns the woman. Self-serving memoirs are a literary genre older than Rome, and already their function was to whitewash the powerful at the expense of the woman who had exposed him. Not a conspiracy in the novelistic sense, not a secret meeting, not a written order. A slope, the one every institution follows when a record embarrasses it. You do not erase it, you reinterpret it. You do not burn the file, you change the label on the box. Textual historians today see chapter 38 as an independent archive from the clan of Judah, an old tribal tradition later stitched into the middle of the Joseph story. At the Collège de France, the work of Thomas Romer and the documentary school has underscored how deliberate that insertion was. Someone in ancient Israel wanted the royal tribe to keep, in full view, the story of its own shame, and of the woman who was more righteous than it was. For its time, that was an act of astonishing boldness. It took centuries of Christian pulpits to wear it down, but the job still had to be finished. Smearing the woman wasn't enough. The crime itself still remained. That 9th verse, too precise, too disturbing. And this is where the story tips into documented absurdity. The crime committed against Tamar was about to be given a name, and that name erases Tamar. At the very start of the 18th century, an anonymous pamphlet appeared in London with a Latin title, Onania. With a parade of chilling clinical cases, it denounced the sin of self-pollution and its supposed effects: blindness, weakness, madness. It was a massive success, reprinted again and again across Europe. Then, in 1760, a doctor from Lausanne, Samuel Auguste Tissot, published the treatise that would lock down the continent for a century and a half. Onanism, a dissertation on the diseases caused by masturbation. Tissot was serious, respected, read in every medical faculty. The word was out. It entered dictionaries, medical textbooks, confessionals, everyday language. Onanism. Now look at the scale of the distortion. Read verse 9 again. Onan goes to his brother's wife, uses her body, and spills onto the ground what he owes her, in order to seize an inheritance. Onan's sin is not solitary pleasure. It is an act involving two people, forced on a woman with no escape, repeated, self-serving, a crime with a victim. Yet Enlightenment theology and medicine turned it into the name for an act done alone. Once the vice was renamed, it became something practiced in solitude, and so the victim was removed from the story, not by a censor, but by grammar. Where Tamar once was, there is nothing. The executioner's name became a dictionary word. The victim's name did not even become a footnote. Look for Tamar in Tissot's 1,000 pages, in the reprints of Onania, in the treatises that terrorized generations of adolescents right up to the 20th century. She isn't there. The only episode in the Bible in which she stands at the exact legal center gave rise to a continent's worth of moral literature without her. That is erasure in its chemically pure form. Her innocence was not challenged. The crime scene itself was dissolved. And what about the church today, you might ask? Open the lectionary, the official calendar of Sunday readings, the one that decides what hundreds of millions of believers will hear at Mass. Look for Genesis chapter 38. Take your time. It isn't there. Not on a single Sunday in any liturgical year. The major shared Protestant lectionaries skip over it too. From the pulpit, they read chapter 37, Joseph sold into slavery. They read chapter 39,
Joseph in Egypt. And in between, silence steps over Tamar the way you step over a puddle. No decree forbids it. None needs to. Omission is a form of censorship that leaves no fingerprints. Send the woman away. Rename the crime. Remove the chapter. 3 gestures, 3 eras, 1 single method. Now we have to talk about fire, because in this story, fire did not remain a metaphor. It merely changed centuries. Paris, June 1st, 1310. The Place de Grève, just steps from the Seine. The smell of the river, the murmur of a great crowd, the wood being stacked. That morning, they burn a woman who wrote a book. Her name is Marguerite Porete. A Beguine from Hainaut, independent and learned, she wrote in French, not in Latin, but in French, the language of ordinary people, a mystical treatise, the mirror of simple souls. Her trial drew in 21 theologians from the University of Paris, summoned by the Inquisitor of France to examine the words of a woman. She refused to appear, refused to recant, refused even to speak to them. Before her judges, Marguerite did what Tamar did before the procession. She did not beg. The chroniclers recorded the dignity of her death. The crowd, they say, wept. 2 women, 2 pyres, more than 3,000 years apart. For Tamar, the fire is put out, because the man who condemned her, when faced with the evidence, had one flash of honesty that history would never ask of him again. For Marguerite, the fire burns, because 21 doctors of theology, together, did not have the courage of a patriarch from the Bronze Age. Between those 2 flames stands exactly the same question. What does a male institution do when a woman holds something that judges it? Ask the question in any era, and the answer always comes in the same order. First, they push the woman aside. Go back to your father's house as a widow. Go back to your convent. Go back to your kitchen. Go back to your silence. Then, if she still refuses to be quiet, they reclassify the case. The accuser becomes the schemer. The evidence becomes provocation. The crime committed against her becomes the fault she is said to have committed. Finally, if the file still won't go away, they simply stop reading it out loud. No one bans anything. They just step over it. And after 3 generations, no one even remembers there was ever anything there to step over. The Beguines of the north in Flanders would learn that in the 14th century. Entire communities of women with no husbands and no lifelong vows. Women who worked, cared for the sick, and taught outside male supervision. Suspected, dissolved, scattered, absorbed, until even the word itself had come to mean almost nothing. An institution doesn't need a long line of bonfires. It only needs control of 3 things: the pen, the reading schedule, and the dictionary. The power of chapter 38, what makes it feel almost unbearably modern, lies in a procedural detail. Tamar wins because she kept the evidence. The seal, the cord, the staff. For months, hidden away in her father's house, she held the exact equivalent of what courts everywhere demand today: material proof, dated and impossible to fake, identifying the person responsible. She did not shout louder than the patriarch. She documented better than he did. 38 centuries before our courtrooms, a Canaanite widow laid down the harshest rule of the whole case. When a system has already condemned you, the cry can be smothered. The record cannot. That is no doubt why this chapter is so embarrassing, and why it fascinates so many who discover it. It is not the story of a victim comforted by heaven. It is the story of a victim who builds her own case, coolly, without ever raising her voice, and gets from her tormentor the confession that the institution would then spend 16 centuries covering over. The most scandalous biblical story in the canon is, quite literally, a manual for the counter-investigation.
If you're opening this file tonight, then by now you can feel just how strange the situation is. None of this is hidden. Every document cited in this investigation has been published, translated, made available. Genesis in every home, Jerome in every patristics library, Tissot in the rare book collections of our universities, Poret's trial in the edited archives used by medieval scholars. No locked chest, no secret. Just a light no one ever switches on from this angle. Very few people move it. Now, you're one of them. All that remains is to close the file, and to close it where it first opened, with clothing. This whole story is about fabric. Joseph's tunic, dipped in a young goat's blood to deceive a father. Widow's clothes, forced onto Tamar to bury her alive. The veil of Onan, chosen by her to trap the liar. Then, once again, the widow's clothes, put back on without a word as she waits for the hour of proof. In this world, men use clothing to cover up their crimes. Tamar uses it to make justice possible. Even the midwife, in the final scene, settles the dispute between the twins with a crimson thread. Fabric, a weapon of lies, ends up becoming an instrument of truth, tied around a newborn's wrist. And then there is the final garment in the story, the one people always forget, the robe of royal statistics. Because it has to be said one more time, coldly, so the scale of it sinks in. Without Tamar, there is no Perez. Without Perez, there is no Boaz, no Obed, no Jesse. Without Jesse, there is no David, no dynasty, no court psalms, no Davidic promise, no awaited son of David, and no first page of Matthew. The entire framework of messianic hope, first Jewish and then Christian, rests genealogically on the decision of an exploited widow not to let the lie win. The system that cast her out ended up kneeling before her descendants. That is the title of this investigation, and piece by piece, it is what the texts say. 3 facts to settle the account. Remember them. They fit in one hand. A woman was handed over twice to unworthy men, then cast out on the basis of a lie the biblical text itself exposes in an aside. This woman, condemned to the fire without trial by the patriarch of the tribe, produced the evidence, won the confession. She is more righteous than I am. And the text crowned her mother of the royal line, ancestor of David, named at the very beginning of the New Testament. And the apparatus that inherited those texts spent centuries reversing the verdict. A sinner for Jerome, a fornicator in the mouths of preachers, erased so completely that even her name vanished from her own case file in the writings of moralizing scholars, skipped over by the lectionaries. The text never changed. The commentary did. But history, with its taste for detail, saved one irony for the end that no one had planned. Every year, in the calendar of the Catholic Church, December 17th arrives. On that day, in every church in the world where Mass is celebrated, the Gospel reading is fixed in advance, with no way around it and no shortened version. Matthew's genealogy, the full list, all 42 generations. And the priest, whoever he is, wherever he is, has to say the line. Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. 7 days later, on Christmas Eve, the Missal offers it again to open the night. At the very moment the institution is preparing to celebrate a birth that looks scandalous in the eyes of the world,
A bride-to-be, pregnant with a child her betrothed cannot account for. It reads aloud once more, almost against its own will, the name of the first woman who forced the line of salvation through a wall of lies. They took her chapter out of the Sunday readings, reversed the verdict, and renamed the crime. And once a year, their own calendar forces them to say her name in front of everyone. No one in the congregation knows who she is. Now you do. When the list begins to roll by, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, you'll hear verse 3 coming like a witness approaching the stand. By Tamar. 2 words, and beneath them, a coerced marriage disguised as an anecdote, a pyre snuffed out at the last moment, 3 objects of clay and wood raised against the patriarch, and 10 generations of patience before the throne of David. She was given no known tomb, no hymn, no feast day on the calendar, not a single chapel in all Christendom bearing her name. She has something better. She has an unforgeable line in Christianity's birth record, and the obligation laid on her opponents to read it aloud every year until the end of time. If this investigation moved you, share it. That's how it spreads, and this channel survives on that alone. Subscribe, like this video, and write in the comments the name of the next woman history buried and needs to be unearthed. Bathsheba, Junia, Phoebe, the others. The next investigation will come from your comments. The Tamar file remains open on our shelves, chapter 38, within arm's reach. The fire did not get the woman. Oblivion did not get the name. And next December 17th, somewhere near you, a voice will say it without knowing what it sets alight.